Welcome to Foundstone Conversations, a series where we chat with industry and business leaders about what they're seeing and hearing across their sector, business strategy, connecting with their customers and community, and sharing some of their real-world lived experiences from across their career. And today we're joined by Liesel Wett. Welcome, Liesel.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. So, Liesel, just a quick rundown for the viewers in terms of your background and for context. Liesel is the chair of Goodwin Aged Care Services out of the ACT. She is the CEO of Australian Pathology and also non-exec director of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. I know there's a few more in there, but they're the main ones. You can check out Liesel's profile afterwards. Liesel, so I'm sure those things, and considering the last kind of 18 months we've had, is keeping you kind of busy.
Yeah, they have. They certainly have. So when the pandemic first hit, I tell you, I was working very long hours and having lots of conversations with the Minister for Health very late at night, that's for sure. Yeah,
I can imagine. I've seen a few bits of content in terms of, you know, what your organisations are doing, both in aged care and pathology, and it's you've really been on the front line. So thank you for all your efforts.
I'll pass my thanks on to the people that are on the front line, but thank you.
Fantastic. So as we look back on the last 18 months, it's certainly been unique times, hasn't it? There's been a lot of unique things happen. And as we look forward, there's still perhaps a lot of unknowns in terms of where, you know, community and society and perhaps the pandemic is heading. It'd be good just to hear from you, perhaps looking back on the last 18 months and then looking forward. What are you seeing and hearing at the moment across the sectors you're involved with?
Okay, I might start with pathology because that's sort of front of mind. I think one of the big conversations we need to have, and one of the, I suppose, the strategy development, or I think I saw JJ Fruin, the person that's leading on behalf of Australia our roadmap out of the pandemic. It's a bit of they're war gaming, and I think that's what we need to do. We need to be scenario planning what the situation might be. So from a pathology perspective, you might have seen last week in Sydney with their recent outbreak, we did something like 76,000 tests. Now that's a record number of tests. So we're still not out of the woods yet. We're still in the midst, I would say, in the middle of this pandemic. But from our perspective, and from a bigger, if you go up in the helicopter, and I'm sure this is front of mind for the PM and the health minister and anyone in any sort of senior leadership role, is how do we get out of it and how do we learn to live with it? And that impacts, you know, you don't realise it impacts all parts of business. It's not just the tourism industry when we shut the borders. It's all sorts of people, small catering businesses, you know, families with kids that are trying to homeschool and, you know, work from home. Like it's a sector-wide, Australia-wide impact. So from our perspective in pathology, how are we driving that conversation about, well, what are the thresholds that we're comfortable with as a nation? Because we seem to have gone from this suppression strategy to elimination. And I think that's difficult, and that's what's causing difficulty for business. So I think that's one thing we need to do. From a Goodwin perspective, if I just talk about aged care, we've recently signed a contract with the federal government to immunise our own staff. So we will do that in the next couple of weeks. But, you know, unfortunately in aged care, your clients leave you quite regularly. So we're seeing that even though we've got 90-something% of our residents vaccinated, and we did that very early on. We were lucky, we advocated strongly, and we had people come in and protect our residents. Because we've got attrition, we're seeing new people come in and they may not be vaccinated. So it's not just like something that we can do, you know, one stop or two shots, two vaccinations, and then go, oh yeah, my job's done, that's it. It's an ongoing thing that we need to be able to manage. So I think that conversation around longer term, how are we living with the virus, what are our tolerances tolerance levels as a society around some of these things, and how do we get back to a COVID normal? That's a conversation we need to keep having, and to try and look to the future so that we can get back to some sort of normalcy.
That's true. Yeah, thank you for sharing those insights, and seeing it from those different health segment perspectives is really interesting. I heard yourself on a panel, yourself and Mike Baird, not too long ago, on an aged care panel. That was a lunch in Melbourne not too long ago, and talking about, in terms of more specifically the aged care sector and what's happening in that sector. Obviously, the Royal Commission report has been released, and that's being made sense of, and there's movement forward on that. But I really wanted to, I know I heard you and Mike talking about the sense of community, and really as a board member and as a chair, and how you're really getting a real sense of what's happening with the community that you operate in, both your residents, their families, and the broader society which you operate in. And then how you really, yourself and the board and the executive and the staff, really carry that, getting an understanding, carry that culture through the organisation. It'd be great just to hear, perhaps, I know I've heard a couple of examples from you before, but how perhaps you're going about that, getting the live read from the community, and then how you're having that flow throughout the organisation.
Yeah. So Goodwin is actually the largest aged care provider here in the Greater Canberra region. So we do reach up to Goulburn and down to the coast, down to Bateman's Bay. So it's not, even though Canberra is a smallish town, community, we do have quite a fair and far reach. So one of the things that we've always done is engage well with our residents, and we also run an independent living community, and we also deliver home care. So we've always had good engagement across all those three streams of our business. And part of that, I believe quite strongly in being someone that's approachable and available. I need to be somebody that the people we're looking after and providing services to can speak to on a whatever basis. So at Goodwin, for a long time, we've had something called a Residents General Forum, which was a bridge between the board and our residents. So we have representatives that come to that committee. It's a constitutional requirement. It's actually written in. It's the only named committee of the board that's in our constitution. And we've had that since I've been on the board, so 10, 12 years, something like that. And that's been really successful. It's grown over time to where we needed it to be. We talk to our residents and our resident representatives that are on this committee that it's actually about the whole of Goodwin. It's not just about, in my unit, my friend cooked lamb chops and they smoke, and, so we're not talking about specific issues. We're talking about whole of Goodwin impact. And one of the things we saw from that was the residents raised with us, our clients raised with us, that they don't like the use of the word aged care. They don't believe that they're aged people. They're part of the community. They're older Australians or senior Australians. And so as a result of that committee, we had a small working group that worked on the language that we used within our organisation with our residents and with our potential residents, so that we actually reformatted that to be more sensitive to the people that we wanted to attract to come and live with us and let us look after them. So, I mean, that's just one example of how the board has worked well with our residents and our clients to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Yeah, that's...
And when the Royal Commission started, we had already had a lot of practices in place for engaging with our community. So we'd already started, we sort of upped the ante. We thought that we possibly weren't spending as much time as we should have been as a board, touching and feeling and tasting our culture and putting our finger on the pulse of what was actually going on. So like most boards, we rotate our board meetings, but we decided that we'd have opportunities, structured opportunities, and organic ones as well, to basically spend some time talking to our residents and our clients. And that's been quite humbling, I have to say. So much so that I think every second person I talk to, you know, how are you? How long have you been here for? Do you like it here? And the answer is always no. And it does get me in the heart every time. It's always like, oh, we're doing something wrong. But it's not that. It's that people don't want to be there. They want to be back in their own homes or in their own communities. And lots of times too, kids will move their parents out of their local community into somewhere where they live. So they're actually away from their friends as well. So it's actually, it's quite sad sometimes when you talk to people and they, you know, they're telling you their story, and their story, they don't want to be there. They want to be back at home with friends and family, and they, you know, they might get visitors. There's some statistic, it's, the health minister talks about it all the time. Something like 60% of residents don't ever have a visitor, which is really, really sad, because the only people they're talking to are you and your staff and each other, hopefully. So, I mean, that's been really humbling for us as a board to get out and not just to talk to people we're looking after, but to remind ourselves of the reasons why we're there. And we're there to look after those vulnerable people that, you know, their situation isn't great. They might not get a visitor. Yes, you know, the food is great at Goodwin, but it's not what, you know, I cooked at home, and my curry sausages aren't quite the same. And, you know, all those familiar things that we sort of take for granted as we get older.
Yeah, I really appreciate you talking us through those specific examples, because what resonates with me out of the picture you paint there, Liesel, is, you know, that bridge between the board and residents, and the fact that you're out there having, you know, direct conversations with residents. I don't know if that happens in every organisation within aged care, or at least broader than healthcare and other sectors. So I do see that as still fairly unique in terms of you're out there, you know, conversing, listening to the people in your care, because I don't think from a governance perspective it's still there yet across all boards within the sector and broader. So perhaps, you know, you perhaps take that for granted as a chair, that is what you do, and that's kind of standard. But I do think that other organisations perhaps can learn from that.
Definitely. It's been a very eye-opening and grounding is probably the better word. It's a grounding experience, and it reminds you why you're there. So I was in Ainslie in one of our sites not very long ago. There was someone from one of the local committees there. I waved. They were all having their fish and chips, which was Thursday's special or whatever it was. And this is classic aged care. I waved and they were a long way away from me. And one of them must have said, "Who's that?" And what the gentleman I waved to said, "Oh, that's Liesel Wett. She's the chair of the board." So I actually went over and said hello, and they told me what they were doing and what they were up to and all sorts of things. So, yeah.
That's wonderful. I know you shared, perhaps similar to that story, some of the practical things you're doing around that. If I've got it right, the community hall events that you're holding for both staff and I think external partners, you know.
Yeah. So we run a day club program, which is part of the home care program, which is basically a socialization program for older people. So often as people get older, they don't tend to leave the house, or they're by themselves and they physically can't leave the house, but they're still living alone. And so we run a program across 3 sites actually, where we bring people together, and we have, you know, might have a local magician or someone that'll come in with a keyboard and sing songs with them, and they might do a cooking exercise or whatever it is. And we had a piece of land that we decided we would build our own day club, which is, if you think about it, like a community hall, a bit bigger with a full kitchen and some offices, but that sort of, you know, shape venue that people can come together and share experiences. And when we opened that, so we had a official opening of the day club down in Monash, and we had 3 people speak. One was myself, the other was the local ACT Older Person of the Year, and then the third was one of our residents who participated in this program. And, you know, the team had written me a fabulous speech, which I delivered, and our ACT Australian of the Year talked about, you know, older Australians and senior Australians. And then our local participant in that day club delivered his story. And so often when you open something or welcome people to something, you have lots of officials there. I had about half of my board, so 4 other colleagues with me. The staff were there, other residents, important people, local members, but we also had the local developers there as well. And this man got up and said, it was a very sad story. He got up and said, my life, I thought, was 4 walls and my television. That's all I thought my life was. And then all of a sudden, these angels from Goodwin came and picked me up and brought me to this wonderful place. And now my life is worth living. And I am just so happy to be part of something again. Anyway, I remember we were all, because he started to cry, I had to get up and give him a bit of a hug and everything. Anyway, his message basically was, this was something that he looked forward to, that we provided to him, that made his life worth living, that was outside of his 4 walls and his TV. So that was his message, and, you know, the message of you don't realise the impact you're having. Anyway, after the official thing, we all went and had a cup of tea and a scone or something or other. And I remember going to my directors, my other 4 colleagues, and saying, okay, is everyone reminded why we're here? And we're all nodding, saying, yes, this is exactly why we're here, Liesel. But more interesting was the impact that that man had on the local developers, the builders of this building. And they were quite shaken up by all of this and said to me, you know, Liesel, we never see this side of what we deliver for you. We only ever see the, you know, things that go wrong, or the leaks in the roof, or the, you know, door that doesn't lock properly. They've not had the opportunity to ever see how fantastic an impact that they're having in their contribution to what we're doing and delivering. So they were quite humbled again by the role that they were playing, and it put it into perspective for them.
Yeah, that's huge, that story, and thank you for sharing it, because I think it's I suppose, as you said there, you're reminded as a chair and a board, and then broader staff, of why you're doing this. And it seemed like that man who shared his lived experience really brought it home, and then extended it to all your partners as well, which is pretty powerful.
Absolutely.
From a culture perspective, I've heard you say before, you know, as a board, the culture starts with the board, and
that's right.
I've got it right. My behaviour matters.
That's right.
So I think that's a really powerful subject to have just a bit more of a conversation on. Can you give us a bit more of an insight of what that means to you as a chair?
Yeah. I think, you know, people do bandy around the whole tone from the top, and I think whenever I talk about tone from the top, I always like to give an example of what I actually mean by tone from the top. So I think everything I do matters. So my behaviour, my language, the way that I work with the CEO, the way that I work with the senior team, the way that I and my fellow colleagues as board directors work together, all of that to me is about how we're setting the tone from the top and how we're driving the culture of our organisation. But it's not just that. It's other stuff that we do. And that's when I talk about what I do matters. So the fact that I am approachable and will go and say hello to some of our residents who I know are quite involved in our local committees and in you know, their villages. The fact that I will go and talk to our residents, it doesn't matter what I'm doing, I'll go and say hello and see what they're up to, if they're having lunch or if they've got a sometimes they have knitting clubs or whatever it is. You know, I'm always there talking to them and learning from them, because these people have lived their whole lives, and the stories they have in their experiences are phenomenal. And sometimes they will share you just a tiny little bit of, you know, their life experience or what they did in a former life, or will tell you the same story sometimes 4 times over. And you know that that's an early onset dementia diagnosis, and you're seeing that, you're living that in a small group with your colleagues or with some other residents, that someone's telling you the same story 4 times over, and you can see what the staff are dealing with as well. So from my perspective, it's really important the way that I behave and the leadership I show as chair of the board, and particularly how well I work with the CEO. Now, that doesn't mean that, you know, we're friends and we go to the pub together every week. It's more about our working business relationship and how that is built on trust. But it's also a very open relationship where we can talk about issues when we need to.
So is that what you're saying, you know, in your involvement, you know, as CEO and then with the Australian Institute of Company Directors? Are you seeing that come more into focus between executives and boards, you know, that closer relationship? And with staff?
100%. If you don't have a good relationship as a chair with your CEO, it's not going to work. It's really, really, really important. And we often do talk about that at AICD, but also about the tone, I suppose the leadership role we have in setting the culture of an organisation as a board. I mean, the tricky thing about that is, how do we measure that and quantify it? And, you know, there are companies that have terrible cultures but are successful. It would be great to be able to show that if you had a healthy, vibrant culture that was ethical and moral and delivered its strategy, how that actually then resulted in the success of your company. Just while I'm on that, and the link between culture and strategy, one of the big things that we do at Goodwin, and, you know, this is a very simple thing, but I think it's very effective. Every time we make a major decision, obviously it has to fit in with our strategy, but the last question we ask before we make those decisions is, would I be happy if mum or dad or grandma got this service or lived here and received this impact? So it's really important to us that we reflect, okay, would I be happy if my mum was here, that this was the impact of this decision we're making on her and her care? So that's sort of the last thing that we do. It's not a formal thing. It's not a line in our strategic plan that we have to tick. It's our last, I suppose, check and balance, that we're happy with the decisions that we're making as a board, because you do make very big decisions. We do, because we develop, so we build large communities, really. So how are our decisions affecting the people we're looking after is really what we do right before we decide.
I think that's a brilliant example of, you know, remaining and keeping grounded with the people you're serving. So appreciate you sharing that. In terms of strategy and culture, and you've talked a bit about it now, you know, there's been the last little while, there's been a lot of unknowns, and there still perhaps is going into the future. Within the aged care sector, we've got the Royal Commission that's been released, and the findings and recommendations. There's still a lot to work through there, isn't there, from a funding and etc. perspective.
Yes.
From a strategy perspective, can you tell us a bit more about how you have gone about your strategy and how that continues to evolve as perhaps things change within society and the broader community?
I think, well, one thing I would say with respect to our strategy at Goodwin is that we've always pushed the envelope a little bit, and for example, we had a clinical governance committee because I said to the chairman at the time, what were we doing about care? We were spending a lot of time talking about buildings and estate management, and what were we doing talking about our care models? And the chairman at the time said, that's a great idea, Liesel, you can chair it. So, you know, we've led a lot of that early work. We had a clinical governance framework before it was mandated in the standards. We have a research program with a research agenda and framework. We were the first organisation to bring a pharmacist on staff. Now that's being replicated across the country because people are seeing the value of having a different set of clinicians that work together as a team. So we've really pushed the envelope. We've got a growth strategy. So that's part of our mantra, is how do we build and grow, and how do we still support our residents with the best care and services? How are we always improving those? We don't always get it right. But when we get it wrong, we make sure that we correct it and we don't do it again. So we're not perfect, but we do try and drive that innovation and that clinical care. And the board is something that the board comes back and checks with the CEO. How are we doing this? What are other people doing? How are we benchmarking ourselves? Because one of the big things that we've decided or discussed and decided as a board is that we're encouraging the whole STAR system, because we need to improve. And the Royal Commission, unfortunately, showed us some really, I can't even think of the right word, sad, disappointing situations where people weren't getting the care and their leadership wasn't on top of what was being delivered. So they didn't know what was happening. So one of the things that I spend a lot of time with our CEO. We have a formal catch up every 2 weeks. And then if there's issues, we sort through those during the week. But one of the big things that I think we all need to do is to make sure that we understand the business that we're in. And I think the Royal Commission showed us that people didn't understand their business. And that was where the sad stories came out about people's care. So if I get questions, just as an example, if I get a question at the AGM, I am quite able to answer those questions. So a couple of years ago, I got a question about workforce and workforce retention and what we were doing to encourage people to stay with us. And I was able to answer that question at some level of detail, not as much as the CEO would have, but some level that showed that, yes, I was on top of this and the board are on top of this issue. And these are the things that we've tasked the CEO with, and she's brought up to us around retention, keeping people safe, et cetera, et cetera.
I think the way you summarise it there, understanding the business we are in, is probably at the heart of some of the recommendations, isn't it? And
yep.
Organisations having a real good look at, and it sounds like you're ahead of the curve in terms of those care models. You've been focusing on them for quite some time. So I do see that, although it sounds perhaps simple, it is when translating that into the real world is not simple, is it?
No. Well, and plus when you don't have, I mean, I have a clinical background, but my expertise is in health systems, how the systems all work together and improving them to work better together. But at some level, you need to have a basic understanding of what you're delivering. So we deliver palliative care. What does that mean? It means that we have a higher level of skilled workforce. We've had 24/7 nursing across each site every day, every night. So we know that that's a decision our board has made around the best clinical care models that we think we need to deliver for our residents. We employ all of our allied health staff because we can then move them across the business to deliver care in different parts of the business. So into our home care packages, program and packages, as well as across our residential aged care. So they're decisions we've made based on research and evidence and partnerships that we've built over the years. But at the, for example, actually, I'll take a step back. What we originally wanted to do was to employ our own GP, and we spent a couple of years trying to drive that agenda. This is what we wanted to do. We made it so easy to have a GP on site, et cetera, et cetera. But the biggest problem is that the credentialing and the accreditation frameworks for general practice wouldn't allow us to have somebody. So I said to the team, well, you need to go away and have a look at other workforce models and have a look at where else you can push the scope of practice to see what else we can deliver. So we have clinical nurse consultant in aged care. We have a geriatrician that is on site a couple of sessions a week. Then we did a piece of research around the value and the delivery model of having a pharmacist on staff, what that meant. And that's been quite a significant impact for our residents, but also for the health system as far as savings go. So that, you know, there's all those sorts of drivers. What's next for us? Well, we've got psychology students that that rotate through. So we're very much trying to build a model within the existing parameters, pushing that model as far as we can to make sure that the care is what is improved for the client or our resident.
Yeah, it really sounds like those things you've talked through right through to the psychology students. You've really got out there and you've had the care model, you know, at the centre, and then you've actually done practical things around that. So it's refreshing to hear. Just lastly from strategy, you know, listening to the conversations you've been having with your residents, your partners, you know, creating those forums for example, that gentleman who shared his lived experience. Are you finding that those very grassroots conversations are helping you make informed decisions on your strategy as things change and progress?
Yeah. So one of the big things that we spend a bit of time talking about is consumer expectations of aged care. So, and sometimes there's conflict between the person you're looking after and the family, but nobody wants to be there. There's still aged care, residential aged care, I should say, more specifically, still has, you know, not a great perception in the client base. People don't want to go there to live the rest of their lives. When I first started with Goodwin, our length of stay for somebody in one of our residential aged care facilities was something like 5 years. Now the length of stay is about 18 months. So people are coming in, they're a lot older, they're a lot sicker because they don't actually want to be there. They want to stay in their own home, in their own community. So our, I suppose, decision or discussion at a board level is what services are we delivering that meet people's needs. So if people don't want to come into residential aged care, how are we assisting them with living at home, with other services, etc., but still having that core facility? And we do a lot more than just look after people. We have a palliative care partnership and all sorts of things. So how are we actually meeting those needs of those people? Because we know they don't actually want to be there most of the time.
Yeah, I think just being aware and acknowledging that, I think, is again refreshing, because that is what's happening in real life. So to be able to have compassion with that and acknowledge it is you know, helps people through that, doesn't it? So
yeah, I mean, it's a tough gig too, and there's a lot of change coming. You know, there's, apart from models of care and nursing hours mandated and things like that, there's changing funding models, there's how do we link in allied health, all that stuff is going to throw a lot of balls up in the air. And that's not to say that what we're doing, well, we like to think what we're doing is best practice care, but that doesn't mean you can't improve it. And we need to make sure that the people that we've got working with us want to stay with us and continue to deliver those care and services to people that, you know, are under our care. So yes, they're doing a great job. Could we do better? 100%. Should we have a star rating system? 100%.
Yeah.
Will there be more red tape? Yes, there will.
It's something that everyone needs to work through, isn't it?
Yep.
Liesel, just to wrap up, in terms of a bit of a broader question, when you look back in your career and your career now as both in the capacity as a CEO and a chair, is there any things that stand out to you? I'm just thinking, you know, some of our listeners are in similar positions or aspiring to be. If we look at, you know, you can look at it from, you know, within the aged care or healthcare sector, or even broader, some of the learnings that you've had perhaps that stand out. Is there anything that's, and I know that's a broad question, you can answer it any way you'd like, but is there anything that stands out that perhaps that has helped you in your career to date and going forward that perhaps you could share, you know, from a guidance perspective, and that can be really broad or narrow?
Yeah, probably. I mean, a couple of things. One is, I mean, I've always worked in the healthcare space, and one of the things that I've seen very clearly is that change is a constant. You know, there's new technologies coming in place. We need to make sure that we're on top of whatever the best available evidence is and make that best practice everyday practice. And that's a challenge for us all in healthcare delivery. But I think more generally, I mean, I talked about before what I do matters, or how I behave matters. But I also think if you're reflecting on your own performance and your own self, you need to very much be true to yourself. And a very smart person that I worked for one day said to me, you need to trust your gut. And if it feels wrong, it is wrong. And I think that's really important lesson to learn, especially as a leader. The only other thing I would say is that if things are worth doing, then they're normally hard work, and most achievements are a result of a lot of hard work. It's not something that, like, nothing in my career has fallen in my lap. I've worked very hard to get things achieved, and I think most people would agree that if it's worth doing, it's going to be hard work, and you need to put in those hours and those, you know, those calls to get those things done.
Brilliant, thank you. Just, you know, from just listening to those, noting them down, I think how I behave matters really resonates with me. And then as well as being true to yourself, those two go together as you've painted that picture. And I think a lot of the time there's so much noise and there's pressure in every industry, isn't there? Perhaps to do things a certain way, but if we can just trust our gut and be true to ourselves, that principle can hold us in good stead, can't it?
Absolutely.
Great. Well, Liesel, thank you very much for sharing all of your insights and your own lived experience. It's been very helpful, and I'm sure will be helpful to others in the industry and broader. So thank you very much, and all the best for the rest of the year.